Back in the days of old, when the southern sun beat down on the cotton fields, there existed a force known as the Slave Patrol. These folks weren't your friendly neighborhood watch. They were tasked with keeping the enslaved in line, ensuring they toiled without rebellion. Meanwhile, up north, where the factories hummed and the immigrant masses flowed, a different breed of watchmen prowled the streets. They weren't just keeping an eye out for petty thieves and drunks. They were there to keep the undesirables in check, the free blacks, the immigrants, those who dared to challenge the status quo. The story starts long before modern police forces. In the era of slavery, slave patrols hunted down escaped people and instilled fear in black communities. After slavery ended, racist policies like black codes criminalized everyday life for black people in the South. Jim Crow laws enforced segregation and discrimination, with police acting as enforcers, often turning a blind eye to Klan violence or even participating in it themselves. And when those oppressed souls dared to stand up and fight for their rights during the civil rights movement, they were met with a ferocity unmatched. Dogs bared their teeth, hoses unleashed torrents of water, and the very guardians of the law turned a blind eye to their suffering. Black Americans fought back. The civil rights movement challenged Jim Crow, but faced brutal police repression. Millions of African Americans, desperate to escape this oppression, migrated north. However, racial prejudice followed them. White communities feared black people and used intimidation and discriminatory housing practices to keep them segregated. Inner-city black neighborhoods became isolated and neglected, with heavy police presence. Even as the decades rolled by and society evolved, the specter of injustice remained. The war on drugs became a war on communities of color, with enforcement disproportionately targeting black individuals. Instead of addressing the root causes of poverty and unrest, the system blamed black people. The war on drugs, fueled by racial stereotypes, focused heavily on inner cities. Though black and white communities used drugs at similar rates, black people were arrested and jailed at much higher rates. This wasn't about stopping crime, but about control. Mass incarceration became a tool to lock away a significant portion of black America. The role of law enforcement in relation to black communities has been fraught with tension and injustice. From the earliest days of the nation, policing has often served to reinforce the interests of the Caucasian elite, safeguarding their property and social status at the expense of black individuals. Take, for instance, the Fugitive Slave Act. Enacted in 1793 and strengthened in 1850, this legislation compelled the return of escaped slaves to their owners, utilizing law enforcement, federal marshals, and militias to enforce its provisions. The Constitution itself contained clauses obligating the return of runaway slaves to their purported owners, further entrenching the legal framework for their subjugation. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 didn't just enforce slavery. It reignited a national debate about liberty and justice. It drew a line in the sand, pushing the country ever closer to civil war. And though the act was intended to preserve the Union, it ended up dividing it even further. Yet, resistance to this oppressive system was palpable. Thousands of enslaved individuals sought freedom, despite the risk of capture and punishment. The clashes between law enforcement and black communities over the enforcement of this law were among the earliest and most significant expressions of defiance against systemic oppression. Throughout history, phrases like "I can't breathe" and the symbolic gesture of hands raised, "don't shoot," have reverberated through generations of black struggle against police brutality and injustice. These expressions, tragically familiar to contemporary ears, echo the enduring fight for equality and dignity in the face of systemic racism. Black communities have always spoken out against police brutality. But with social media, their voices have undeniable power. Videos capturing violence and discrimination against black people by police are now widely shared, bringing national attention to the issue. After the Civil War, the nation found itself at a crossroads. The Reconstruction era was meant to guide the South back into the Union and ensure the smooth transition of newly freed slaves into society. But things didn't exactly go as planned. You see, in some places, black folks were finally gaining a voice. They could vote, even hold public office. But as you might imagine, not everyone was happy about that. White Southerners, they didn't take too kindly to seeing black folks in positions of power. They started enacting these things called black codes. Laws meant to keep black folks in their place, limited where they could work, how much they could earn. Made it mighty tough for them to have a fair shake. And if you dared to speak up, well, you could find yourself on the wrong side of the law. Black folks faced arrest, violence, even death, just for trying to live free. But even when the laws changed, the struggle didn't end. Oh no, it just took on a new face. Jim Crow, they called it. A system of discrimination and terror that aimed to keep black folks in their place. For nearly a century, black folks faced segregation, discrimination, and violence at every turn. Their rights trampled, their dignity denied. But through it all, they persevered, fighting for justice, for equality. And though the road was long and hard, they never gave up hope. Racial bias in policing is a complex issue with a long history. It's crucial to acknowledge this history and its ongoing impact. By understanding the roots of the problem, we can begin to work towards solutions.